Good morning. Welcome back to Financial Issues. I'm Dan Celia. It is great to be here. We've got some important economic news that I want to talk about, and we are going to do that. Some things that under normal conditions I'd probably get pretty worked up about. So just know in my heart that I'm worked up about it. It just can't get too worked up or I'll start a coughing fit or something like that. But plugging along, and do want to point out a couple things that I think are very, very important to bring up. So we'll start with some of the economic data that has come out. Of course, some of the recent economic data, the data that has come out this morning are jobless claims. Jobless claims, by the way, fell to a 4-month low. As a matter of fact, they haven't been this low since, I think it was late November of 2013, since we saw 311,000 first-time unemployment claims. Now, that's good news, and I'm starting out with this good news because I think it is good news, I suppose. But I do want to say this about that, is that we do have to take into consideration where nobody seems to want to do this, but we do have to take into consideration the fact that every company out there is getting critically close to their employment being as low as it could possibly be. There's a critical mass that they need to have in order to maintain current production and some employment that has to be there in order to be able to handle an increase in production. So they've pretty much reached that. Don't forget, unemployment benefits of 99 weeks is again going through this cycle where it is running out for an awful lot of people. So we are starting to see continuing claims decrease a little bit. Now, 4-month low, not since November late November, maybe it was early December, I believe it was late November, since we've seen a number that low for first-time unemployment claims. So if you believe all those numbers that are out there, it's a good thing. Let me talk about another good thing. Or at least the headline is a good thing, and it's going to be perceived throughout the markets, a good thing. And I'm very disturbed about this number this morning. Very disturbed about this number. We got a GDP fourth quarter revision of 2.6%. That is going to be our GDP. This is the final look. Remember that. This is going to be our GDP growth for 2013. Now, it was revised up from the look last time, the middle look, the second look of 2.4%. The street was expecting 2.8%. So this is down from expectations. But nevertheless, 2.6% GDP growth, when we look back over the past 5 years, it's pretty good, right? Now, it's a D.C. reality check. I'm talking about Dan Celia, not Washington, D.C. A D.C. reality check on these numbers here. Because I think it's important to note a couple things. And some of the things I'm going to note are bad news, far worse than the so-called good news of 2.6% growth. First of all, let me just explain this because this is important to note. We should have had a 3% GDP growth at best when we figure the recalculation of GDP, what is now being calculated in new GDP growth. I've written articles about that since April of last year. If you want to see a recent article where I went through and explained it again, you can go to christianpress.com, click on, I think they have a tab there that says columnist, click on my name, and it'll come up with all my various columns over the last 6 months or so. I don't know how long they archive them. But I know the article explaining the way that we are now recalculating GDP growth, maybe 2 articles explaining that, are there. So you can go back and look at that if you want to know what I mean at christianpress.com. Now, you can also find it archived on my website as well, by the way, at financialissues.org. But one of the things that we should have gotten is a 3% GDP growth. Now, let me explain something to you. Under the old way, this was the way before July 1st, under the standard way of calculating GDP growth, we are now calculating GDP growth in a way that no other developed nation is calculating. I used to say, except for Japan. That's not true. I misspoke when I said that. Yes, Japan includes a couple of things that other developed nations don't include that we are now including, but they don't include everything that we are now including. So we are it. Under the old system, 2.5% GDP growth was considered, not by me, but was considered in general, to be a status quo GDP growth. In other words, 2.5% GDP growth allowed us to continue to maintain the crummy economy that we have. It wasn't growth, but we weren't going backwards. It was keeping up with population growth, keeping up with workforce population growth. 2.5% did that. I have always said anything below 2.5% means we are going backwards in GDP growth, because one has to consider new workers coming into the workforce, coming of age, and population growth. You have to consider that. If you don't, there's nothing accurate about the number. So, under the old calculation, 2.5 was the break even. Under the new calculation, to be frank with you, I don't know what it is. I have not had the time to go through all of the recalculations. So frankly, I've been waiting for somebody else to do it, somebody else reputable. But that hasn't happened yet. But by my initial estimates, and it is an estimate, it's got to be at least somewhere in the neighborhood of 3.1, 3.2 to get to a break-even point. So, under the new calculation starting last July, 2.6% growth for the year is negative growth in the economy. It's not good growth. This is not something to be excited about. We are still in a stagnant, at best. I don't believe it's stagnant. I believe it's going backwards. But at best, we're at a stagnant economy. Why is that good? Why is that good? That's not the bad news. You may think it's the bad news. It's not. The bad news is that when you dig deep into these numbers, you find out that finally we can find true value in Obamacare. Yes, Obamacare has been the positive number here, the great mover of GDP. Here's what I mean. GDP number going at 2.6 is mainly, in other words, the majority of the change in numbers that is getting us to better GDP growth comes because of healthcare spending, because U.S. Americans are spending more on healthcare than they have ever spent before. Healthcare outlays caused consumer spending to be revised upward to 3.3% from a previous 2.6%. And that is the reason why we are seeing the gains in GDP, and it's because of the biggest gain in 3 years of consumer spending, and all of that consumer spending has been on healthcare costs. Now, somebody, feel free to call me and explain to me how all of us losing discretionary income by spending more on our health care has made our gross domestic product grow? Can somebody explain the economic equation of how one can relate our premium increases to an increase in gross domestic product? And yet, I waited as long as I could. I had 3 televisions on 3 different networks, business networks, waiting to hear this. Nobody said a word about it. As a matter of fact, one network went into zero detail about the GDP growth number of 2.6. Just read the headline. The other bad news. Yeah, there's more. If you remember when the number came out last time, I was very excited because business investment had increased. And I said, hey, I'm not getting too excited. 1 month doesn't make a trend. Well, business investment has been lowered this time around. That's not good. That is not good. Now, corporate profits rose 2%. Sales did not. That's not good. Listen, this is a reality check. This is not a test. This is just a reality check. Because I can't, though I do, worry about everybody out there in the economy and in the country. But I can worry about the listeners and the viewers to this program. And I will not sit here and put a good face on GDP growth when you have these kinds of things that I've just pointed out prevalent and nobody's talking about it. Please, viewers, listeners, please do not get lulled to sleep by mainstream media, not in what they're reporting, but what they're not reporting. Not in what they're reporting, but what they refuse to report. Don't get lulled into thinking that finally we have some good growth. I don't enjoy being the bearer of bad news. It's not what I want to do. I have had comments from people, even when I go to places to speak, that I'm too negative. My reaction is always, when the numbers become positive, I promise I will be positive. But I'm not going to be irresponsible. Like every business network in this country, even Fox Business, every business network in this country, and report the headline number as if it's a good thing. And I am appalled at how many people, how many reporters, how many analysts are totally unwilling to dig a little deep into the numbers. I want you to understand, folks, the number came out a half an hour ago. Well, longer than a half an hour ago, but 50 minutes ago. It took me 15 minutes to get the data that I just reported. I didn't spend days going over these numbers. 866-300-9298.